All right, Facebook land, we are live. Thank you so much for joining us. We are here with the honorable let me see if I can try without laughing, okay?
Yeah.
We are here with the honorable Jeff Stevenson, and you are honorable, and that's why you're sitting right there. I have to sit here, but I'm working to be honorable.
Well, that's good,
in everything
Cody.
I do.
Yeah.
And we just came off a great morning. If you missed this morning, make sure you go to our website, on Facebook, on our app, and catch the message that Jeff shared. Thank you so much for sharing your heart.
Absolutely.
He did an amazing job setting up the biblical foundation for not just marriage, but really what are the vital signs that help make up a healthy marriage. So we had boundaries, bonds, and I'm laying out, and then behaviors. Boundaries, bonds, and behaviors coming from Genesis chapter 2, and then heading into Ephesians 5, which references Genesis chapter 2. It all ties in together. The plan hasn't changed yet, right?
Right.
God's design hasn't changed yet.
I was going to say, Cody, we began with Scripture. A lot of times people prefer to kind of go more with what secular or experiential knowledge they have and then work back to the Bible. And I thought it would probably be better just to begin where, God begins and let that be our foundation. So that's kind of why I chose to do that. And Genesis chapter 2 is a foundational text, as you
Absolutely.
said. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it was just great. I mean, it's simple, yet it's groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part of where our culture's at. You hear some of this stuff, and sometimes the greatest things sound like common sense. But we've gotten so far from that. And that's just humanity. I think that's not just today's day and age, but I think a lot of times we need reminded and brought back to that. If you don't know who Jeff is, first and foremost, he is my father-in-law, and that's an honor.
That's great.
It is an honor.
It is.
And he was my mentor in ministry and just as a man of God. You were my mentor in that before I ever started dating Micah.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that hoped but didn't think it was possible that I'd ever date Micah or then marry and now have 4 kids.
Well, I remember you coming to the house and you wanted to shadow me.
I truly
and I'm thinking,
did.
I'm not sure what this means, but
I really did.
We found out later on what it meant.
Well, yeah, at that point in time, that was truly all there was. And but I valued you and Tawny's marriage. I valued your years and at that point, decades of experience in ministry. And I also really valued your personal relationship with Jesus and with the Word. And for me, that was really, really important for me. It still is. But seeing your dedication, your discipline to Scripture far outside of studying for a sermon, your personal walk with God and the intimacy that I saw that have for you, just in the way that played out with your daughters, with your wife in ministry, and that's something that I've really longed for and have tried to model after. And as different, really, as our personalities are in a lot of ways, we have so much in common in Christ, and it's just been a blessing.
Yeah. Thank you, Cody. Those are real affirming words. I appreciate that a lot.
Well, I mean it. And I want to give everybody, in case they didn't hear this morning, a little bit of your background. Go ahead and share with everybody listening just kind of your background, particularly in kind of the professional academic side and kind of how that works. So just kind of, in a nutshell, kind of your resume, I guess.
Okay. Just real quickly, got training in Bible. My undergrad's in Bible and have a degree in that from Freed-Hardeman University. Started at OVU, Ohio Valley University, and then went to Freed. It was a 2-year school back then.
Yeah.
And got into ministry a little while and felt the real need to be able to help people on a deeper level with some of the problems that they were having. And ventured into a master's program in marriage and family therapy at the University of Akron, which was one of the only schools in Ohio at that time that was offering that particular degree.
That's
and so it was a God thing for me to even get into that program to begin with.
Definitely.
And moved from there. I was in full-time ministry, but also doing marriage and family therapy on the side, right out of school, as a private practitioner, and in part because that particular discipline wasn't regulated in Ohio as of yet. Now it currently is, but back then it wasn't. And from there, my first love has always been Bible theology and that kind of thing, and got introduced to the good folks at Ashland Theological Seminary, and went there to do a doctoral program, which is more in the area of transformational leadership. So I've been in ministry for about this year. I think it'll be 40 years,
That's
and then
awesome.
actually been doing counseling on a professional basis about 20 years. Although since moving here in the last few years, I've done less of the counseling. Still do some, but less of it. God has called me in a different direction. But I still have a great heart and passion for that end of the work. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what a neat resume when you mix kind of professional marriage and family therapy mixed in with all the years of experience with marriage. You clearly aren't running from human beings. You're right there, ground level with people in their walk with Jesus and of course in their marriage. Now, you shared this morning a little bit, you kind of hit on it. I mean, how much of your own background and your, just family and kind of your parents and then you came to faith in Jesus, when you're 18,
yes.
right? And so right here in Delaware County in Ohio, and which is just awesome and kind of full circle here. But how much of that played into kind of your hunger to help people, really have a solid foundation in their marriage?
Oh, I think it was huge. I think you're always in ministry to some degree trying to figure yourself out. And I think my family had a lot of conflict, and it's a very, very lengthy story. I won't get into detail, but there was a lot of conflict and a lot of heartbreak. And as a result, I think that helped me to see my need for Jesus. So when I felt sort of the foundation of my family life begin to deteriorate and completely erode, it was right at that time the Lord just confronted me with the gospel. Yeah. And I was not raised in that kind of an environment at all. If anything, we had a very lukewarm sort of affiliation with a mainline denominational church, and we weren't connected to that at all. It had no connection to our daily life. So got into, became a believer, and then God just led me in the path of ministry, and I feel like that part of my heart hurts for people who go through marital conflict and family conflict. So it's been, I always tell our younger guys to minister out of their pain. Yeah. So wherever your brokenness is, that becomes the direction. Assuming that you're healing and moving in a positive direction, that becomes the path for your best ministry.
Well, I found that to be very true in my own walk in ministry, and with anything from with helping people out of a pornography addiction to my parents' divorce at 13, 14 years old, and really being able to relate in a very personal way, miscarriages, losing children, and before they're born. All of those things are unfortunately very common, and something that I do feel qualified to speak into, in the fact that how Jesus has helped save me from those things and redeemed the pain. And I would tell people, God doesn't want any pain to be wasted. He wants all of it to be useful and create things. And those experiences that all of us can share. And I think as we head into marriage here and some questions that we want to discuss, you said some really important things this morning, because the reality is, as we're going to be talking about, the reality is there's a lot of people who are currently married, who are kind of living in a state of stable crisis. They're living in a state where, no matter what words they use, they're not planning to go anywhere, and they're wanting this to work. But there's some things that's really broken. And some of that comes from, as we talked about this morning, things that maybe they brought in before that relationship and that marriage. Some of it's from their family background. Yeah. Some of it's from things that have happened in that marriage. And you said some really redeeming things about, what do you do when you find yourself there? where's the message of hope and good news for people, which is, again, I find that it's most people in that place of brokenness. If they're listening in right now, just saying, where's this hope? Why should I lean in? Why is it not hopeless for me in my marriage?
Yeah, you're going to find times in your marriage where you feel closer to one another than you do. And then there are going to be points where you're almost living parallel, okay? And, it's something of an impasse. And there may be conflict there may not be conflict there. But if there's conflict, obviously you hopefully get that out on the surface and deal with that. But honestly, I think a lot of this is just a heart condition. I think that we all have a certain level or depth to which we can go spiritually before we hit some kind of rock, where Jesus, talks about, the heart that has, the shallow soil. And there's a sense in which all of our soil has some shallowness to it. And the seed can only go in so far. And so what you have to do is you have to wait for a different breaking point. So this is why pain and struggle in a marriage is a good thing, because it is moving you towards that breaking point. And this is why you don't want to leave. You don't want to move away from that, although that's the temptation.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between a good thing and a fun thing. It's not always fun.
No, it's not.
But if you're leaning into Jesus, and that's the key here is when you come to Jesus for what you need, when you hit those impasses, what do you do? Because our flesh wants to rebel, react, retaliate. Mm-hmm. That's what we want to do. And a lot of times that ends up getting taken out on the people who are very dearest to us, particularly our spouse and those right around us.
And I would say our world doesn't help us with this, because everything you're, just assaulted with on the screen is, high emotion. Everything's just like coming up roses all the time, and there's always some kind of a kick, some kind of a real thrill, and that isn't married life at all.
Right.
Now you may experience some moments like that. I'm not saying you're not going to. I hope you will. Yeah. But if that is going to ebb and flow, and so sometimes we chart what's called marital satisfaction. And marital satisfaction is always highest at the beginning, but then it begins to taper off, level off, and where the real dip comes, the first real dip, is when the kids are born. Yeah. If you can imagine that.
I can imagine that.
And then
I understand what you're talking about.
Okay.
I've had a few.
And then as time goes on, if this is kind of like, this represents degree of satisfaction and this represents time, as time goes on, and the kids are born, you sort of settle into a routine and the satisfaction kind of goes up a little bit, and it takes another dip at adolescence. Okay, and then it's just it's fascinating to track all of that.
I can't imagine why it would happen in adolescence.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then there's a whole other level when you get to empty nester stage.
Yes.
And but that at our wedding, and my wife and I's wedding, you preached on seasons.
Yes.
And taught on that. And Mike and I can attest. We're coming up on our 10-year, and we can attest to those seasons. But there's real beauty in that, because seasons never last forever. Mm-hmm. And some of our hardest seasons have been our most growing seasons. Yep. And it makes us appreciate some of the calmer times, and makes us stronger for the next seasons ahead that are harder, the winters.
And the real frustrating part of that is once you get sort of acclimated to the season, it changes.
It changes, right.
So,
which is why this morning you're saying that the foundation, the bedrock, has to be Jesus. If it's on anything else, then it's shifting to where it's completely disorienting. But if it's not on your spouse as the foundation, that you both are on the real foundation of Jesus, then you can weather those storms in a much healthier way. And we're talking about healthy marriages. This one thing you brought out this morning I thought was great. And again, I just want to remind everybody who's listening, we understand your pain. We've experienced it personally. We've walked with many, many people who are in the midst of it. And very real things. This is not theoretical to you or I.
No, not at all.
This is our families. This is what we've seen. This is what we've walked with people through. But if you're there, and most of you are, we want you to know that Jesus, as you so well said this morning, Jesus has what you need for that season. He has what you need to give you the hope the future, the guidance, the wisdom, the support of God's people, and His love to give you that stability, even through those times that are really tough. A lot of times you don't have all that you need from your spouse, and so I think that's one misconception is my spouse should be able to provide all of my needs. And first of all, it comes from God, right?
Right.
And second of all, it comes from God's people.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the talk about those boundaries. Sometimes we set up those too tight thinking our spouse. Talk a little bit about those unrealistic expectations that we put on our spouse.
Well, I do think that we lean on each other a little hard. And if you're trying to draw life from anything other than Jesus, this is not going anywhere good.
Right.
And so, and there's a sense in which I'm going to be able to provide certain needs to my spouse.
Sure.
Husband or wife, okay? And there's a sense in which that will happen for a while, but ultimately, as I said this morning, you lean on that so hard, and you're gonna find the sandy place. All right. So a person can be a rock,
right,
in some respects, and there should be some sense that happens.
Stability,
right,
and walking together. I know a lot of people struggle with that. We're going to talk. That'll be one of the questions we hit on here in a little bit. But we just want to encourage you, if you're listening, that there's hope for you in your marriage, and that your value is not defined on the health of your marriage. That Jesus has your value. That He's defined that as you as His child, and so.
Let me say this too: that there's no perfect person, and if you have no perfect person and you got two imperfect persons marrying, there's no way that can be a perfect marriage.
Right.
So there's going to be some degree of
conflict,
frustration, conflict that you're going to have to deal with, and you may as well. This is sort of a crude analogy, but it's kind of like driving my 2008 automobile. I could trade that in, all right, but I know what I've got, and if you trade it in, you don't really know what you have, and that's a crude analogy.
That's a good analogy, and you can pair that with a different analogy, like that shows one side of that coin, and the other side is it's like a fine wine, right?
Yeah.
Where if you stick with it, it gets better.
Yes.
With age.
Yes.
Now, in Jesus, in what Jesus calls us to live out marriage, you talked about in Ephesians 5. Sorry, I'm shuffling my stuff here. Where we learn to love and respect one another the way that Christ shows us that submission and sacrifice. Man, can it just get better and better because it gets deeper.
Yes. It
gets deeper, and as you said, those shared pleasures, the good experiences, and the shared pain really make for a rich and vibrant relationship that far surpasses some of the honeymoon phase. That is wonderful and necessary at the beginning, but really a deep richness. But there's this other side. Is the grass actually greener on the other side? Because that's the biggest. I find that's the biggest lie of Satan right there. You might as well work with what you got.
Yeah, I tell people the grass may be greener on the other side of the fence, but it's still got to be mowed. And
still needs maintenance.
Yeah, there still needs to be maintenance. And once again, you can opt out if you want to. I think that produces great damage to the individual and certainly to the person who has been rejected. And those children that have been rejected, if there are children involved. Right. So there's great damage as a result of that. You can opt out and go for a new person, but once again, you don't know. Number one, what you're getting. Number two, you're bringing your own baggage into that new relationship. So it's just as well again to learn how to get along with the person you're with. And to learn something about who you are, because you're bringing the old expression is it takes two to tango.
Right.
And I have yet to see a marital breakdown where it's 100% the fault of one person.
Well, and the grass is greener on the other side potentially until you get there and you realize that you're the one in charge of keeping it green.
Yeah.
And no matter what you touch, turns brown. And I think that's really an introspective thing that you can't control your partner. You can't control your spouse.
Exactly.
So it's hard enough to start reeling in some of the tendencies that we have that we're in charge of in ourselves and looking to Jesus for those things. But I think a lot of it is, I'm not saying it's all that person's fault, but it's something that you really got to look inside yourself and say, what can I do to find greater peace, stability in my walk with Jesus that's going to provide a healthier relationship, a healthier foundation for me to interact with my spouse, even through the things that maybe they need to work on, and the patience that you need, and the selflessness. It really comes from that, digging that root into who Jesus is.
And my heart would go out to, okay, here's a couple that are in a bit of a crisis, and heart goes out to individuals like that, and the struggle, and particularly if one seems to be much more invested than the other. Okay,
right,
and that happens from time to time.
Yes,
and I don't want this to sound I don't want this to sound unfeeling. But with respect to that individual or any other marriage, we're told by our Lord that in this life we're going to have trouble. We're going to have some difficulty.
Yeah.
And as a result of those difficulties, it is in the difficulty that I am perfected. And this is fundamentally the teaching of Jesus and the Scriptures, the New Testament Scriptures, about pain and hardship and suffering. It is having a perfecting work in me. And it just might be that God has chosen to use my marriage as a means of perfecting me. When I push away from that, I'm really robbing myself of the very thing that He is using to strengthen me. Yeah. So I don't want to be unfeeling to someone in a difficult situation, but by the same token, there's that truth, and I think a person like that has to find some degree of joy. Here's where Paul would say, he talked about having the thorn in the flesh. Okay, and you hate to think of your spouse as a thorn in the flesh, but sometimes it happens.
Sometimes
so he says,
I'm the thorn.
Yeah, sometimes I'm the thorn. And in fact, really, what you're saying is right. Paul Faulkner was a great marriage and family therapist, and he wrote a line I've always thought a lot of. He said, "The trouble with us is me."
Right.
Okay, so I might be that thorn, and Paul prays for this thorn to be removed.
Right.
But God does not remove it. In fact, Jesus says that my weakness is made perfect in suffering.
Right.
Okay? So my grace is sufficient for you. So I might just need to realize that, hey, this is God's in control, and I'm going to try to find some joy in this. Mm-hmm. And I'd love for my marriage to be perfect, but it's not. And so how can I help it?
Yeah.
Do the best you can. If you can change it, great. But if you can't change it, you might have to just say, hey, it is what it is, and I'm going to have joy anyway. Yeah. Joy of the Lord is your strength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in your decades of experience working with people, both in marriage and family therapy, and just in ministry, just counseling people so many ways. I'm sure you've done hundreds of weddings.
Yeah.
42 years of being married and ministry.
Yeah.
What do you find are some common threads when you really, if you had to kind of average it out, if that's possible, what would you say really at an underlying problem? Let's start at a really practical level, not maybe even the fundamental level that really what they're actually dealing with, but symptomatically, what do you find that are some of the common things? Is it communication? Is it problems in terms of intimacy and sex? Is it finances? Is it people being unfaithful? I'm sure you've seen it all, but what do you find are some of the common threads that people are really tend to deal with the most?
I can say yes to all of that.
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
And I mean, I've got my list, and I mean, we can talk about that. When you look at studies right now that are being done about why people are divorcing, it's kind of giving you a sense of where the hot spots are.
Right.
And for example, some of those studies are listing things like conflict, a lot of conflict, or maybe infidelity, or a lack of commitment, just basic commitment to the marriage. Other studies are going to point out, there's one study done by divorce360.com, just been a couple of years ago, and they actually interviewed a fairly decent sized sample and got the results back. And what's striking was that men and women vastly differed on why they would initiate a divorce. And the number one issue for women, and this is when you're dealing with research like this is sort of like a snapshot, okay? And the number one issue for women was abuse issues. And that was just staggering to me.
Abuse in the broad sense?
Abuse in the broad sense. Physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse.
Control,
yeah.
It could be anything.
Yeah, domestic violence, all of those kinds of things. What was interesting, though, is that for men, the number one issue was finance. Finance is money.
Why do you think that is? Like, what is it about that you think grabs a hold of a guy's heart and makes him squirm to the point where he says uncle and he wants out?
Yeah.
What is it that is messing with the mind and the heart in a man like that?
I don't know if I know all the answer to that. I think that men, once again, men value respect, and I think if they're out straining, giving it everything I got to making a living, and there's some sense in which maybe that's not respected or valued in the home, I think they get exasperated and they don't know what to do. And I'm not at all saying that the women would be the total problem here, because quite honestly, much of the time he feeds into his own issue. Okay,
sure. Living up to his own expectations.
Yeah. But what was interesting in the research that they did was that right on the heels of finance for men was sex. So in other words, it's like there was 1 point difference or something like that.
Okay.
And so for men, the two big issues are money and sex, and that comes pretty close to what other findings that have been done. So there's a lot of consistency.
Yeah.
Consistency there. So the other part of that is sometimes people. And we've known for years that there's certain risk factors, for example, for divorce. Getting married too young, or maybe not having anything beyond a high school educational deficits. Also, even living together prior to marriage. And the world won't tell you this, okay? But living together prior to marriage has a huge impact on negative impact on marital longevity, especially if a person has lived with a variety of partners. And that's hitting close to where a lot of people are. Another thing that factors in, believe it or not, is the divorce of your family. So if your family of origins has experienced a divorce, let's say we got a couple here, and let's say her family of origins has experienced a divorce when she's growing up, that makes that union twice as susceptible to divorce.
Yeah.
Now, when both
right.
come from divorced families, research is telling us that is tripling. That's tripling the risk for divorce. Now, that doesn't mean that marriage is doomed to fail.
Sure.
What it means is that if that's your history, you probably got to look a little bit more carefully at things. So you're going to find a whole, a pack of devils, if you will. Devils like to run in packs.
Right.
For me, my experience in marriage counseling, huge. I would say communication. Communication is the lifeblood of a marriage. If you're not communicating, you don't have any blood flowing.
Because there's an assumption that both are bringing stuff in.
Yeah.
Both have
Yeah.
a bag full of baggage.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
A trunk full of junk.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. And but the communication is really kind of the lifeline to actually work through that in any healthy way. And today we're doing this, healthy conversations on marriage. I mean, because there has to be a conversation.
Yeah.
I think, how many times do you see just the communication lines just shut off at a certain point?
Yeah.
And we know things aren't going to get better on their own that way. So how often do you just see that communication line severed?
Oh, it's huge. And I'll tell you what's contributing to this is what has been called fatigue and time pressure. Okay, fatigue and time pressure means that we're redlining it in life, out here trying to make the necessary dollars in order to maintain the standard of living that we're having, okay, and we want, and so maybe he's working and she's working, and they're exhausted, and you add kids to that equation. I'm gonna tell you what, if you work 70 hours a week, it's going to be really hard for you to expect to have much in the way of a marriage and a family.
Right, you got nothing left to give.
Yeah, that's right. And you have to find a way.
Yeah.
You have to find a way to get ahead and take your family with you. And I remember when we moved to Louisville, Ohio. I knew that we were going to be working with the church there, and I knew that I was going to be in school doing a doctoral or a graduate school program. Tawny was going to she was going to finish her education. We had 3 kids, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, we're going to have to find a way to carve out intentionally a little bit of space. This is getting back to my boundary thing. A little bit of space so that this family can stay together and breathe. And God helped us with that, but it was through the advice and counsel of some people who were down the road a little bit that kind of spoke into my life and said, hey, you're coming up on a season here that this can be a train wreck for you if you're not careful. So we went through those years and kind of made it through. But
Right.
You're going to have busier seasons. But I think that fatigue and time pressure, that's what's going to shut down your communication. The other thing, quite honestly, is interruptions with electronics and technology and so forth. And today, people are more, they're more connected and less intimate than they've ever been.
Yeah.
And so, and these are good. They're wonderful devices. But how many times you go to a restaurant, Cody, and you see a couple sitting there and they're both on their phones scrolling.
Right.
And I'm thinking, are you texting each other, or it'd be just as easy. It should just be as easy to kind of have a face-to-face conversation.
Right.
Okay. But these things are distracting. So there's all kinds of distractions that are keeping us away from real face-to-face dialogue and communication. So, again. And then you add the inability, perhaps, to deal with conflict. Those things begin to mount up. No communication skills to really handle the conflict. You got a real recipe for disaster. It's no wonder people drift apart.
Right.
And they wake up to strangers.
Well, and you find that a lot of people are the self-coping.
Yeah.
When they begin to feel that, instead of confronting the issue in a healthy way,
Mm-hmm.
talking through it, getting counseling, whatever it might
Yeah.
be for that season of life that they need. A lot of times they try to go inside and they
Yeah.
either bottle or they find an outlet that's going to kind of be the pacifier in a sense.
Yeah.
And all the while drifting. And sometimes people use kids as a crutch, right?
Yes.
Well, we're dealing with kids, and it's really just keeping each other from being at each other. It's kind of ignoring the elephant in the room. And they're just, if they can stay busy with the kids, if they can stay busy with work and the sports activities
Yeah.
and all the birthday parties and the family events, and then all of a sudden you fast forward and it's been 15 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find this for a lot of, and that's why you see even the divorce rate at almost that empty nester stage where they just can't take it anymore. They've been ignoring the problem for so long. It hasn't shrunk. It's only gotten bigger. And they're left and the kids are gone and they're staring at each other going, who am I? Who are you?
Yeah, and I mean, Bowling Green State University did a study years ago, and they coined the expression "gray divorce."
What do they call gray divorce?
Gray divorce. Okay, that's the condition you would have if you had hair at this stage of your life. Okay,
I don't plan to have much more than this, I guess.
But gray divorce, what they figured out was that since 1990 in this country, that divorce rates for those age 50 and up have doubled. And then have even increased beyond that for 65 and older. And today, divorce rates, let's say 50 and older, accounts for 25% of all divorces. So something's happening here, and this is why when you're a couple with children, for example, and as fun as those years are, you have to find a way. Once again, boundary. You have to find a way to carve out some space for the nurturance of that marriage.
Yeah.
Okay. So what that means in a practical sense is, and we tried to do this. Tried as much as we could when our kids were growing up. Didn't always do a perfect job with it at all. But we tried to take at least 2 nights during the month, once every couple of weeks, and we would go out on a date.
Yeah.
And just simple stuff. And it didn't have to be expensive, didn't have to be something just knock your socks off all the time. But we would try to get a babysitter, someone we trusted, and then get away, go see a movie or whatever the case might be. And I think one night we even went up to the airport and just watched planes come in.
Yeah.
Okay, and just something inexpensive.
It's an excuse to talk without interruptions, right?
Exactly. And
that's, again, the lost conversation. A lot of people don't want that.
Right.
They're actually avoiding that. That's exactly what they're avoiding.
Well, and there's a ton of things that will cause you to avoid it. And I think, like, for example, certainly job, and you said, as you said, your children. You mentioned the elephant in the room the other day, or just a moment ago, and I thought, yeah, one of the things that's a real distractor from couples dealing with their stuff.
What?
Pets. I'm serious. Pets run interference. Now, don't get me wrong. I love pets. Okay,
you've had them.
We've had them before,
Past tense.
and great. But I see these people with all of these dogs and cats or whatever. And hey, if that's your thing, great. If you can make it work, wonderful. But sometimes I have literally seen. I've counseled people where the pets are running interference, so that the couple just doesn't deal with their stuff. So all kinds of things. So getting back to like more the prescription thing, you definitely need to find some time where you can get away on a date. And here's something I learned from my in-laws. My in-laws have been married 60 years.
Yeah.
And they're wonderful people.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned my being a mentor, and they have been such wonderful mentors to me personally, and to Tawny, and we're so
They're
blessed
wonderful.
by them. They're great, but we call them Pap and Mammal.
Yeah.
And Pap told me, told Tawny that we would do well through the course of our marriage, maybe 2 to 3 times a year. Okay. Roughly once per season, maybe not quite that we would get away, and we, again, would hire a babysitter and get a hotel room.
Yeah.
And we would just go down to Amish country or go up to Cleveland or Columbus or whatever you wanted to do, and just get away from the kids, have that little bit of a break. And that's the kind of thing that I would say that's the kind of thing you have to do almost to maintain a marriage. And I'm not even talking about furthering it. I'm just saying maintain it.
Well, my wife and I will say something, and it's in great love, but it's kind of tongue in cheek. We'll go on a date and say, I actually like hanging out with you. Because you get so caught up, with 4 kids, you get so caught up in the stuff you have to do.
Yeah.
And kind of running the household.
Yeah.
And all the constant needs, and particularly for my wife, just constantly being tugged on in every direction.
Sure.
It's just, and I'm one of them, and there's different things, and they try to support her, but it's part of my job to pull her out of that.
Yeah.
And I say it takes about an hour or 2 just to help her disconnect emotionally, mentally from whatever the whirlwind, because it's crazy what she's doing. She's a stay-at-home mom now, but even for me, and we have this is on Do Not Disturb or off. There's if somebody's with the kids, we want emergency contact, but she's usually that because I'm usually my phone's buzzing a little more, and we've got each other's attention, but there's something about the built-in kind of space to then be reminded of, I actually enjoy being with you. Yeah. That sounds, it may sound weird at first, but it's true, right? I mean, you've got to, and if you go too long, I mean, it's easy to ask, well, what is this for? Especially if you don't understand kind of where your foundation is at, it's easy to be like, why am I doing this? Why are you doing this?
Love is spelled Time.
Yeah,
and
love
it really is.
That.
And I can remember, and I just fess up, particularly during our family vacations, the first 3 or 4 days, I was just difficult to live with. Now, if certain family members were here, they might say it a little longer than that. but it was difficult, and it took me a few days to decompress.
Yeah.
Off of the demands and the rigors of, and a lot of times people don't understand the demands and rigors of ministry, but it wears.
Emotionally and relationally.
Yeah, I tell people that's why I look this way. Okay, so
you're only 26. You're looking great. You're looking great for being 26 years old. There's so many good things. Again, if you haven't listened to the sermon this morning, there's so many good things in there to really chew on with everything we talked about, boundaries and bonds and things. But I want to ask this question. We see a lot of people. I'll speak for myself. I see a lot of people where the struggle is, and whether both profess to follow Jesus, or just one does.
Yeah.
Either way, and there's a lot of ways I could word it, but I'm going to say it's lopsided. Truly. Not that one side is guiltless and innocent completely and one side has all the fault. But there's one side who is willing to move heaven and earth to get it right.
Yeah.
And they're trying to grow in their faith. They're trying to do it the right way. They're trying to keep their eyes on Jesus, and they just feel like they are pulling a Saint Bernard who's running in the other direction. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
right.
How often are you seeing that? And how would you counsel somebody who's in a very, again, for lack of a better term, a lopsided, kind of unevenly yoked relationship in that way, where the other person's not surrendered to Jesus in a way where they're willing to move heaven and earth to try to do what they need to do?
Yeah, I mean, once again, Paul is going to speak to this in 1 Corinthians 7, and he's going to say that if you're married to an unbeliever, you don't leave the unbeliever because you're going to sanctify them. So the point here is that there is a sanctifying influence in a believing person's impact on their unbelieving spouse. So this is a critical mission opportunity, okay, and it's right in your own door.
Right.
And this is where, for example, if you have a believing husband and an unbelieving wife, I've seen cases like this, and so he has to model this of what Jesus is and who Jesus is and what Jesus' lifestyle is. So he has to take particularly seriously this whole notion of loving your wife like Christ loved the church and giving himself up. So he's got to model for her something different. The tougher end is probably when you have a believing wife and an unbelieving husband, and I think that's the fact that it is tougher is why Peter speaks to that in 1 Peter chapter 3. And Peter talks about how you can win your husband over without a word by your own behavior. And he talks about the purity and reverence of a woman's life and how that a gentle and quiet spirit has great worth in God's sight. Now, I don't think it's an immediate fix, Cody.
Absolutely.
And with unbelieving family members, it's possible you could go 10, 15, 20, 25 years.
My grandma, Jeff, lived this out in real life with her husband.
Okay.
And it took 5+ decades or so.
Oh wow.
But that was what melted his heart.
Yeah.
And he would say that. But it doesn't mean it was easy. And I think again, if for people listening, if you're married, then that's the grass you need to work on making greener. But for those of you who might be watching who aren't married, one thing that when we talk about Ephesians 5 that I tell people when I'm counseling them, doing premarital counseling before marriage, is, wives submit to your husbands, and husbands love your wives sacrificially the way that Jesus loved the church and gave him. So I said, that's a beautiful thing if lived out. But nobody's twisting your arm on who you're marrying. So choose carefully, because wives, he's telling you to submit to your husbands as Christ does to the church, or church does to Jesus.
Yes.
And husbands, you got to love your wives sacrificially, laying your lives down for your wife, just the way Jesus did for the church. I said, but this is why there's a beauty in choosing wisely. Now, again, you can't, the grass may be greener or not, but I think that's so important when we think about, did somebody, who held your hand to the fire when you had to make that choice? And that's something that we've got to own, but yet not get lost in some of the what could be hopelessness in the midst of it.
So the guys, we'd say, choose wisely because you're going to have to sacrifice for her.
Yes.
And to the ladies, we would say, choose wisely because you're going to have to submit to him. And by the way, I should say, as I pointed out this morning, both are really gestures of submission.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And
verse 21 says, submit to one another.
Yeah, out of reverence for Christ.
It sets up the whole thing is submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And you nail it this morning. You say, you look at Jesus. Why does that make sense? Why should we do that? Because Jesus did it first.
Yes. And
we deserved zero. We deserved none of his love, compassion, and sacrifice.
Here's something to consider as well. If you're married to an unbeliever, for example, or there's other kind of marital conflict, the temptation is to lock horns with your spouse. The temptation is to battle against them. What's interesting in the Ephesians passage that we're referring to, and if you check this out, this is Ephesians chapter 5, beginning at verse 21, all the way down to chapter 6 and verse number roughly 13. That whole segment there, he's talking about very volatile relationships. So he deals with the marriage relationship, parent-child relationship, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, and then slave-master relationship, verses 5 through 9. Now, what's easy to miss here is the very next paragraph, chapter 6, verses 10 through 12. He's going to say something like this: your struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of darkness in the heavenly realms.
Yes.
Now, what that means, though, then is that if you're married to someone who you find disagreeable, or they won't be who you want them to be, or maybe they're immovable in terms of their spiritual life, and you start battling them, you're fighting the wrong person.
Right.
You are actually doing the very thing Satan wants you to do. So the question then becomes, what does this spiritual war look like? Yeah. If you're going to fight against the real enemy is Satan. So I would go to the mat and pour out your heart to God and say, God, I want you to just cream whatever spiritual force of darkness has got this guy in an unbelieving state, or has got this woman in a condition she's in. Yeah. I want you to deal with the spiritual realities behind the behaviors that are being evidenced in my home.
Well, and Paul says in Colossians that through Christ on the cross, he's disarmed the power and authorities. Yeah. And so if you're turning to the one who actually is more powerful to fight the right fight against the spiritual warfare, that it's not one of the best kind of analogies, pictures that I've seen. And Adam, I'm forgetting the name of the book that Chris had recommended to us that we checked out. What's that? Real Love in Marriage. It's a great book, and I just couldn't remember the name of the title, but it says, imagine if someone's drowning, you'd never just sit there on the shore and just cross your arms and be like, well, you shouldn't have done this, and you did this to me. And if you picture it that way, there's a different level in your heart of sympathy in seeing that they need help. Yeah. And then if you go in and you're getting hit and they're screaming and they're trying to fight for life, there's a difference of understanding where that's even coming from. It's a lot of times the things that your spouse is wrestling with that may possibly have nothing to do directly with you. You're kind of in the line of fire. But if you imagine them as someone who's drowning, you have a different layer of compassion and patience, and even threshold to take some of the crossfire that might hit you when you're thinking of, I want to help, I want to, that spiritual warfare that maybe your spouse is in, that you might be in. Mm-hmm. And it's something that, it's a different picture of kind of analogously, if your spouse is drowning, then how do I have a different layer? Instead of just blaming them and pointing the finger at them, then you're saying, how do I help you?
Yeah, blame fixes nothing. You have to fix the problem, not the blame. So, and we lash out because it hurts. Yeah. So it hurts us. It affects us. You mentioned that book. Let me give you a couple of others that would be really helpful to people. Absolutely. Things that have meant a lot to me down through the years, and one of them is Willard Harley. Okay. Has some material, and he's very good. Now he's getting, I think he's kind of in the twilight years of his stuff, but it's been out for a while. But Willard Harley did a book entitled "His Needs, Her Needs." Yes. And the significance of that book, and it was a huge seller, and I think it still is. Yes. But the significance of that book is that he spent his career as a marriage and family therapist, and he interviewed 10,000 couples. Yeah. Wow. And basically asked men and women to list their greatest perceived needs. Yeah. Okay? And so I'm going to give you what those needs are. I don't have it memorized, so I'm going to have to look here. But this is what the top 5 needs husbands said they had. Sexual fulfillment was number 1.
For which gender here?
This is for men.
For men, okay.
Okay. Recreational companionship, physical attractiveness, domestic tranquility, and admiration.
It's fascinating.
It is. And again, you can roll your eyes
Can you
and
name
say,
those one more time for everybody
sure.
listening?
It's okay. Well, number 1 is sexual fulfillment. Number
Okay.
2 is recreational companionship. 3 is physical attractiveness, and then domestic tranquility, peace in the home,
Yeah.
and then also admiration. Now he does this for women too,
Yeah.
and so the 10,000 women responded.
Yeah, I wanna
these
hear
are
this.
these are the top responses. Number 1 was affection. Don't hear sex.
Right,
Hear affection.
yeah.
Okay. 2 was conversation. 3 was honesty and openness, and 4 was financial support, and then finally family support. Now, it was, so Harley does this material, and he talks about his needs, her needs, and addressing those needs. But then he has a follow-up book where he talks about love busters. So these are the behaviors that we engage in that actually tear this kind of stuff down.
Yeah.
And so his whole regimen is, understanding the needs, understanding what's breaking the relationship up, and then how do you begin to implement behaviors that capture these needs. And so he's got a series of books that really do a great job with that.
Yeah.
And you know, a couple that was really interested in working on their marriage, and I encourage people to do this before they get into crisis, okay?
Right.
Because a lot of times in crisis,
Preventative,
the wall has been built so high, you're not going to get over it, or the gap has grown so wide, no one wants to cross it. So do this while you can. Jesus would say, settle matters quickly with your adversary, okay?
Right.
Matthew chapter 5.
Right.
So these are some things. Now, it was Emerson Eggerichs, who's another author, a little bit more recent, and he wrote the book Love and Respect.
Yeah.
And he tends to, if you want to find a way to learn more of the concepts of what it means to love your wife or how to respect your husband, Emerson Eggerichs would be the guy to read. He's very good with that. And I think it was Harley, actually, who said, he coined the concept of what he called the love bank.
Yeah.
And he said, it's kind of like your marriage is when you're meeting someone, your spouse's needs, which are different than yours.
Yeah.
When you meet those needs, it's almost like you're depositing something in this bank, which means that when you have a moment where you need to make a withdrawal, and we all make withdrawals, a slight, an oversight of something or something you say or do that just might not be right, that's a withdrawal. Your relationship can tolerate that because you've got all these deposits.
Right.
But if you've never invested and you're constantly withdrawing, that account's going to go on overdraft.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're gonna close the account. And so he talks about this whole love bank concept.
Yeah.
It's very helpful. I think he's onto something.
Yeah. Are there any other resources, book-wise, that you'd recommend? Because those are great books, and I've actually read those.
Yeah.
I know there's Sacred Marriage.
Yeah.
I believe it's by John Piper, right? Is he the one?
That
one. And then there's You and Me Forever by Francis Chan and Lisa Chan.
Okay.
That's a great one as
Yes.
well. That one's not designed for crisis, more for living together on mission for Jesus. And
that's more nurturance. Yeah.
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 But is there any other ones that you'd say, these ones are really go-to kind of right off the bat?
Yeah, in my mind, honestly, I'm giving you kind of the ones I think that I would go to. And
right, just the top tier of like.
Yeah,
really great
I really like their stuff. Used it, and
5 Love Languages is a really good
there's another one.
Communication. Yes. That's one I've read as well. That it just helps you put language to things that are really simple and obvious, but helps you identify what are the ways that I perceive love.
Yeah.
And what are the ways that my spouse perceives love? Because it's a lot of times very surprising for what you think.
Yeah.
And then you know how to better meet their needs.
Well, I would say that Jesus says, whatever you do to others, whatever you want done to you.
Yeah.
And the only relationship in the world where that doesn't work is marriage. And the reason is because your needs are different.
Right.
You stop and think about it, and I don't mean to be
Yeah.
cute about that. We know what he means,
Right.
and we have to apply that. But there's a little bit of a twist when it comes to marriage because my wife's needs are not going to be my needs.
Right.
Okay, and come
Right.
Valentine's Day, I don't get her a Craftsman shop back. Okay,
As much as you would appreciate
as much as I would
you getting
appreciate that.
for her.
Right.
Well, yeah, and I think there is. I think in our English language we use the word love very generally.
Yeah, we do.
But as you mentioned today, really the woman wants cherished and loved, and the man wants respected and valued in that way. And we usually just smack love as the title.
Yeah.
But really, 5 love languages and things like that help us really break down, well, what does that look like for specifically for you? I mean, love, but what does that really, how do you practically meet that need?
Yeah.
If you were talking to a couple that was actually in crisis, no matter the definition, they feel like they're in crisis. You've got anything from conferences to marriage, what do they call those? Marriage 911 seminars, to meeting with a counselor on a regular basis, either one-on-one or as a couple together. What do you find, if it's as a marriage and family therapist, what do you think is going to be the best kind of shock to the system to even get them on the right path? Not that it's solved quickly, but that's saying, hey, this is in crisis, here's what we need to do.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind on that is be careful what you share with whom.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because when you're hurting in a marriage like this, your tendency is to try to get some kind of salve, some kind of support, because you're hurting. And we tend to go to 2 sources that are going to be counterproductive. One would be, amazingly enough, family members. And the reason that is a difficulty is because you mean well, and they may help you immeasurably. The problem is that oftentimes family members are going to side with you. And as a result, therefore, when it comes to your mate now, understanding he's now or she's now dealing not just with you, she's dealing with you and the family. So what happens with her?
Yeah.
Her defenses go up.
Yeah.
Okay? So that creates a problem. And I really counsel people, do not share marital troubles with members of the opposite sex, particularly at work or even at church. And the reason for that is pretty obvious.
Right. It builds an unhealthy intimacy of relationship and that. Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm going to, for example, if I'm in a state of marital crisis, and I go to, for example, a female coworker or a secretary or something like that, and I'm telling her about my struggles, that's feeding her.
Right.
She feels fed by that. She feels needed and valued, and she may well misread that, and pretty soon something's happening that you didn't really expect to happen. So what I would encourage people to do first and foremost is you just need to sit down, probably with a pad of paper, and write down 2 or 3 things that are really the sticking points for you right now, and talk about them. And this is hard.
Yeah.
Talk about them in as civil a tone as possible, no arguing, and just as a matter of fact, say, here's where I'm struggling in the marriage. Okay,
Yeah.
And one would go, and the other would listen, and just listen, and then the next one would go, and then vice versa, and we keep that moving and work through the list.
Yeah.
And then at some point, you're going to have to say, hey, okay, I own this. I know I did that, and I'm sorry, there has to be a good amount of grace and forgiveness.
Humility.
Yeah, humility.
A massive amount of humility.
And in problems like this, once again, our pride goes up. Our defenses are pride. Okay,
Yeah.
So if you can talk it out, great. If you need some kind of a referee,
Yeah.
all right, certainly go to your minister. For example, people at Good News Church should obviously be able to see you as a resource.
And on that, I want to say that a lot of times I'm just helping to facilitate. I'm able to listen in and know maybe how to best direct somebody.
Yeah.
I'm not usually the end answer for them, but I can help them assess kind of where they're at, give very practical biblical advice, but also help them know that, counseling might be good for this area, or maybe it sounds like this is an issue that really needs resolved in your own life, and that some counseling on that may just give you a neutral, a safe place to just talk that out and get guided through that. We still know that 40% of people
in the world, in the United States, will go to their minister first.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's
Right.
That's huge. So, I mean, minister is going to be a good resource. If on the other hand you feel like, okay, this is something that is beyond me, I don't really want or know how to deal with this, or don't have the time to deal with that, you want to make a referral to, and I really stress this, a Christian marriage and family therapist.
Yes.
Someone who is a committed Christian, a believer.
Yes.
And the reason that's important is because I'm approaching problems from a biblical perspective.
Yeah. The designer.
The world doesn't see problems the way Christians see problems. And then obviously we don't see solutions the same way.
Right.
So if you can find a Christian marriage and family therapist, that would be great.
Yeah.
Any of the weekend kind of things that you're talking about, that's good, as long as they're not.
Those are Kickstarter, like those weekend things. They're
Mm-hmm.
not the solution. This is something that is it's that spark to not romantically, but a spark to kickstart, maybe wake up. Maybe help you identify the areas that you really do need to work on. Maybe even this next steps practically you can take. But it's really the hard work comes.
Yeah.
I want to make a correction here. Speaking of marriage, my wife texts me and says that the book Sacred Marriage is not John Piper, but Gary Thomas.
Okay.
Okay. So shout out to my wife. Thank you for fact checking. Facebook land, keep me honest here. So here's the thing. We plan to go to 4. It's 4. And it's neat. There's some questions coming in online that some people have, and so each one, maybe we haven't hit on exactly. And there's a lot of specifics that we could go down this road or that road. One of them is in the topic of people who are married now who have experienced divorce, particularly maybe if this question might come from someone who is married to someone who has been divorced. Mm-hmm. So they're bringing in. We talked about, if you didn't listen in this morning, all of it's good. One of the topics you talk about is the stickability, and there's a lot of ways that gets played out as you talked about this morning. But how would you counsel somebody who's maybe struggling with, what that person's brought in? Now again, just that's where they're at. That's where you find them today, mm-hmm. and their spouse has already experienced divorce mm-hmm. themselves, and they're bringing that into the marriage. Mm-hmm. How would you counsel that person in terms of their response and how they would deal with that situation?
Well, I think the whole area of what we call remarital counseling. Now, there's premarital counseling. This is remarital counseling here.
I like that.
This is for people who have already gone through a marriage and are have divorced and gone through and are starting into a second or maybe even a third marriage. That's a whole new sort of frontier. Not entirely new, but it's newer.
Right.
Okay, and I would encourage again people, God-fearing Christian people, to do some reading on this. There's a book by Les and Leslie Parrott.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a husband and wife team, and
they do a great job.
they have some good material on making your second marriage succeed. Okay, so you Google that, and they can that book will be helpful to you. I think what I try to really work with on people coming into second marriages, there must be a point at which, and I don't think you're ready for a second marriage unless you have let go of the very, very strong feelings related to your former spouse, to the extent that you're almost always blaming them for the breakdown of the marriage. What I really want to sensitively do with this person is ask them, talk about ways that you might have contributed to that. And I think you have to own that. And the reason that's important to deal with that stuff is because if you don't deal with that stuff and bring that into the next marriage, it's going to be a Groundhog Day. It's going to happen.
Which is unfortunately what you said. The percentages get not more favorable. Again, it's not an automatic.
Yeah.
But the percentages, they just don't get more favorable with each marriage, remarriage.
So really dealing with, and you got to do some soul searching here. And what are some ways that I failed? And we can talk about your ex-spouse,
Right,
but
just-
that's not,
you can't- yeah.
they're not there.
They gotta
What are the
take
ways
ownership.
that you have contributed? What could you have done differently? And I've found those kinds of discussions, and if a person, again, throws up defenses with that, that's really telling me I'm probably going to suggest that you wait on any kind of a further relationship. But if you can calmly talk through some of where, your struggles have been, I think we can move forward from that.
Yeah.
And depending on what those are, that's going to shape a little bit about what
Yeah.
specific counsel is going to.
I want to take this opportunity on that topic of divorce. I preached within the last year on the topic, and I quoted the verse that says, God hates divorce.
Yeah.
Now, and I told our people, I said, of course God hates divorce. And I made a distinction here. I said, God hates divorce because he knows how much brokenness
Yes.
it causes.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that he hates the person who has
Yes.
experienced divorce. And I want to be just, again, breathing hope into those, because I know how many people just here at Good News Church, just in this small sample size, have experienced personally divorce for a myriad of reasons.
Yes.
But I want you to know that God loves you, and why he hates divorce is because of all the pain that you personally understand and have experienced. That God loves you, but hates divorce because sin breaks things.
Yeah, and I would just say if you're have been divorced, there's a lot of pain in that, and the last thing in the world we want to go around doing is saying, okay, hey, let's sort of rub everybody's nose and whatever. That's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is finding a way to use this divorce or to use the pain redemptively,
Right.
and bring that into the new relationship.
Yeah. One of the questions that came in through Facebook is, how would you counsel, and this is a beautiful thing, there are more couples that are more ethnically diverse.
Yeah.
And that can come, again, we're speaking broad terms here, because that can be nationality, skin color, but primarily what it boils down to, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is an internal culture. Mm-hmm. Which is not, it's not one is good and one is bad, it's just different.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful thing that people are more and more finding that is something that is good, but yet the challenges can be unique. Mm-hmm. Just very different backgrounds, upbringings, norms, family dynamics, what expectations.
Yeah.
So how would you counsel a couple who's dealing with very different ethnic backgrounds from one another, but they're married and maybe they have children together and they're raising these children, so they have expectations of what it's like to be that child and what they want for their child and different. So how would you counsel someone maybe to be thinking about that in healthy ways that they could kind of continue to come together?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why, of course, back years ago, this was the big concern about what we call interracial marriage. Okay, was how do you merge these things?
Right.
And that was part of it. That wasn't all of it, but it was part of it. And certainly, I think the courtship in a relationship like this has to be aware of those differences, those nuances that are different, and there has to be some real honest discussion, from the start of what those differences are and how they're going to play out in the relationship. Now, once married, the good news is that basically speaking, the concept of marriage and child rearing don't really change, no matter who you are. And there's some basic things with respect to both. Paul does not get ethnically specific in his comments in Ephesians 5 or Colossians chapter 3.
Yeah.
And when you think of parenting, I hear people say today, well, there's God never made a book on parenting. Well, he most surely did. and it's called the Bible.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of parents in the Bible.
Yeah, exactly right. And
ways
you look
not
at
to do it and
you
ways
look
to do
you
it.
look at the book of Proverbs and the counsel that's given there. Basically, when you're talking about parenting, this is so important. children are going to eat your marriage alive if you don't control the children somehow. So I'm a firm advocate of warmth and nurturance in the home, and consistent love and discipline.
Yeah.
Okay. And I should have said consistent discipline in the sense of rules and consequences.
Yeah.
So as a parent,
Consistency, yeah.
yeah, there's got to be consistency.
Right.
So I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
I mean, your home's going to have some kind of rules. What are they going to be?
Right.
So moms and dads have to come together on what those rules are going to be, and then what the consequences are going to be
Yeah.
when those rules are broken, because they will be broken.
Yeah.
And so, and if one is strong and the other's weak, guess where the children are going to gravitate?
Yeah.
They're going to go to the weak side all the time, because children know how to divide and conquer.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's really important
They're smart.
Yeah, we're really important for parents to be together on this. And I believe that if a couple will forge a home on the foundation of Jesus Christ, and will love each other, respect each other's needs in the parent, in the marriage relationship, and then as parents, you widen that out and you treat your children with respect, and you nurture them, and
Yeah.
you tend to them, but you also discipline them.
Yeah.
Okay, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the rod of correction will drive it far from them.
Yeah.
Proverbs 22:15. So, I mean, God is very clear about this. And
Yeah.
let me say just a real quick word here, because the world wants you to believe that being firm with your kids, and even the whole concept of corporal punishment or spanking,
Yeah.
correlates with development of aggression in children. It does not. And there's no good research that would suggest that it does. What the research does suggest, that if all you use is corporal punishment, and there's not a context or a home where there's warmth and nurturance, there's inconsistency in the rules and a whole host of other factors, then it's very possible
Absolutely,
that, okay,
yeah.
but there's got to be a whole lot of other things riding on that thing
Right.
than just that.
Right.
There's no good research. In fact, the research is very, very strongly in favor of loving parents using discipline or even corporal punishment in a consistent way. That can't be your only tool in your arsenal.
Absolutely,
Okay,
yeah.
Not even close.
Yeah.
There are other things there too, but there are times when the only way a child will learn is pain, and pain from a loving parent.
Yeah.
Your Father deals with you that way. Yeah.
Right.
Your Heavenly
right.
Father
The
does.
Lord disciplines
Yeah.
those He loves,
Yeah.
and we grow in pleasure and pain, as you said today.
That's right.
We bond in that.
Yeah.
It's been a wonderful conversation,
Yeah.
Jeff. And again,
Enjoyed it.
I'm so grateful I get the honor of kind of living this life with you as family and as a brother in Christ. And thank you again for what you do to point people to Jesus, to point people to the healthy things that they can do. And we want to talk about next steps as we close out here for you and your marriage. First of all, no matter who you are, and I know there's people listening across the country in different places, so you might not live right here in the Columbus area. If you do, and you don't have a church home, we find that this is an incredibly important way for you and your spouse to grow. And maybe your spouse isn't there and isn't ready yet to take that step. But for you and your walk with Jesus, don't just come to church. Open yourself up to people who want to walk with you. And it doesn't mean that you have to divulge all of everything that's going on in your life to everybody you know. But you need poured into through the Word of God and through the people of God in a consistent way. And through that, God will give you more clarity, more strength, more wisdom, more peace in your life to then tackle the next steps as God unfolds those in your life, in your marriage, because you can only take really, your part. You can only do your role. And so make sure that you're connecting to a local church body in your area. And again, all of you are always welcome here at Good News Church or at Belpre Church of Christ or anything like that.
Yeah.
And there's so many places. But and secondly, if you're at a place in your marriage where that communication line has seemed severed, try to reopen that. Pray to God that the Lord will give your spouse a receptivity to that. Come to them in humility and open your heart up. Don't blame. Take your part and just let them know where you're at and just be honest. And then if it seems need be, you talk to somebody. It doesn't have to be me. Talk to somebody that you can trust, who you know is going to give you wise, godly counsel, and maybe even point you in the right direction of a next step that you both can tangibly take together. Take seriously the books that we suggested, and also at Good News Church, if you do not already have a login to Right Now Media, if you come to us as Good News Church, we will provide you a link where you can subscribe for free, completely free, and it's all amazing Christian resources, a ton of them. Now, there's all kinds of Bible studies and kids stuff, but there's a ton of stuff on marriage and family and all kinds of topical things, men and women. And it's an amazing resource that a ton of our people here at Good News Church use on a regular basis for helping grow in their marriage. I know my wife and I, we love to turn on some of the parrots, that couple that you were talking about, Les and Leslie. Yeah. And they've got some great material on there, and there's all kinds of different things. And then the ladies have a Bible study coming up for women only, and that's starting up in February, and it's on our website as well, and you can let us know. Let us know if you have any questions about anything that was mentioned you want more details on, but you can do that. There's just so many ways you can take next steps. But really, we want you to grow in your faith. And as you grow in your faith, you will grow in the wisdom and really be tooled up for the things that relationships, let alone marriages, call you to live into. And so again, no matter who you are and where you're coming from and the health of your marriage, or if you've been broken, through what divorce does and you're grappling through that, we want you to know that we love you and that Jesus loves you so much that he died for you. And he's not here to condemn you. He took the condemnation on the cross. If you turn to him and you put your faith and trust in Jesus, he's got everything that you will need, even through the difficult times, even through the valley of the shadow, the valley of the shadow of death. And so turn to Jesus. If you have not yet put your faith and trust in Jesus, I want you to talk to somebody about that. Again, we would love to talk to you. I would love to talk with you about that. But Jesus calls you to put your faith and trust in him, that he is your allegiance and he is your Lord, your master. And that's a beautiful thing because he's a beautiful master and he loves you. And you put your faith and trust in him and you identify your life with him and you give your life to him through his death, burial, and resurrection. In baptism, you die to your old self. You say, I'm done with my ways. My ways aren't working. Yeah. And you die to your old self, and you're buried in baptism, and you're raised up to a new life in him. And he will give you, through his Spirit, all that you need if you continue to turn to him. And that's a walk with Jesus that is, I live off of that. Yeah, it's the joy of my life.
Can I throw something in on this? I think when you think of the close-knit connection between our minds and our bodies and our souls and even our relationships. I think I shared with you the other day, these are so closely connected they catch each other's diseases. Yeah. Okay? Right. So if you're having a problem in your marriage, there's a real strong possibility that something is amiss on the spiritual end. And so I would encourage you, as Cody has said, to be sure that you not dismiss this spiritual component, that you look at Jesus, because he alone, Satan is the thief who comes to steal and kill and destroy. Jesus is the one who's come to give you life and to give it to you abundantly. Amen. So latch on to him.
Yes. Well, again, thank you so much. We want to continue this conversation. So we're about to close out our live session here, but connect with us. Again, all of our information, Adam's going to post that below. Thank you, Adam Kennedy, for just making this happen. He's running behind the scenes here and helping this. So make sure you contact us. There's no excuse to not continue the conversation. If you need to, you know how to find us. If you're watching this, you know how to connect with us. We would love to continue to pour into you, encourage you, pray for you, walk with you, and help your marriage really find the health that God designed it to be. And so thank you again so much for being with us, and we hope to see you in person soon.
God bless.